Okay, so again, so going back, so these are the steps, okay, in forming a modified LP for using Big M method. Okay, so the first thing that we need to check is the solution part of of the constraint. So if there would be a negative, if there is a negative at the solution part, so we multiply the constraints with -1. Okay, so we multiply the constraints with -1 so as to make it positive. And then the next one is so for every less than two or equal, less than or equal to constraints, so we just simply add slack variables. So for every greater than two or equal to, so we introduce artificial variables as well as surplus variables. So we minus surplus variables and then we add artificial variables. And then for equal to constraints, so we introduce plus A1 or yung artificial variable natin, so plus A1 or plus A2. And then for every artificial variables that we added on our constraints, so we subtract M A1 or we subtract M A2 on our objective function. And then we take note that M is a very large number. So let's have, uh, or these are the steps. Okay, so using the big M method. So once we were able to understand what the problem is, so the second is we formulate the LP. So when we say we formulate the LP, so uh, uh, we define okay our objective function, and as well as we define our constraints. So using inequalities or even using equations. So once we have our formulated LP, we develop the augmented matrix. So we get all the coefficient of the inequality or the equations, and then afterwards, so this is our first step. The first step, we eliminate the m's. Okay, so from the artificial variable column, so that's our first step. And then the second step is we select, so which would be the basic variable, then which are the non-basic variable. And then we have to take note that the variable can be selected as a basic variable if it corresponds to a column in the tableau that has exactly one non-zero element, and the non-zero element in the column is not in the same row as the non-zero element in the column of another basic variable. So we'll understand this one. So once we had shown the solution, okay, so for our first problem. And then, so once we decided, okay, so for our basic and non-basic variables, so that's the time that we use the simplex method. So kung paano tayo nag-solve ng simplex method, ganun din yung gagawin natin. Okay, so we just have a simple, ano, no? Hindi siya right away application. So it's just a uh, simple example. Kasi medyo mahaba yung solution ng Big M method. So we are given an example. So our LP here, so it's already given. So we maximize Z. So we're in Z is equals to x1 plus 5x2. So we have two variables, x1 and x2. And then we have two constraints. So 3x1 plus 4x2 should be less than or equal to 6. And x1 plus 3x2 should be greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so the first step, okay, yung first step natin, so we have to check, is there a negative constant on the right side? So as we can see here, so 6 is positive, 2 is positive as well. We're good with that one. So the next is we introduce, okay, so we introduce slack variable, okay, so for less than or equal to, so the first constraint, okay, is less than or introduce the slack variable. So that is 3 x1, so plus 4 x2, and then mine plus S1. And then we change the less than or equal to sign to equal sign, and we make it 6. Okay. So yung S1 would be the one to compensate, okay, to reach it to a value of 6. And then for our second constraint, so it's greater than or equal to, so therefore, so this one would be x1, and then plus 3x2. And then, so since this one is greater than or equal to, so we subtract a surplus variable. So, bandi sa kamukha nung S1, so it will become minus S2. Okay, so since this is a surplus variable. Then sabi natin, for every surplus variable, so we add an artificial variable. Yung artificial variable natin nun, so would be plus A1, and then that would be equal to 2. And then, so for our, ano naman, so for our objective function, so we have Z. So we have Z, and then we transpose the x1 and 5x2 to the left-hand side. So it will become minus 5x1 and minus, 1 is x1. So minus x1, then minus 5x2. And then afterwards, so for every, dito. So for every artificial variable, so we introduce m, okay, so we plus ma1 there. Then that would be equal to 0. So z minus x1 minus 5x2, and then we add yung, since we only have one artificial variable, so we now have ma1 is equals to 0. And then from here, so we now form our augmented matrix. Okay? So for our augmented matrix, so we write down all our variables here. So we have the basic. So ang variable natin is the z. So may tayong variable x1, the variable x2, may tayong slack variable s1, slack variable s2, at saka yung artificial variable natin. And of course, we have our solution. And then, so for our first, for our objective function, so this objective function correspond yung sa z variable natin. And then, doon sa constraint number 1 natin, so constraint number 1, so pertains to the slack variable 1. And then yung for constraint number 2, yun naman yung for slack variable number 2 natin. So slack variable number 2. And then from there, so we write our matrix. So para doon sa matrix natin, so we just get the coefficient. So yung z natin, it's 1. x1 is negative 1. x2 is negative 5. So under the objective function, we don't have s1, so it will be 0. So we don't have s2 as well. And then for our a1, so we have m. Okay, so m for a1, and then for the solution will be 0. And then afterwards, so for our first constraint, so we have 0 for z, x1 is 3, x2 is 4. So we have s1, which is 1, s2 is 0, and then we don't have the artificial variable. And then we have 6 for our solution. For the third one, we have x1, which is 1. And then, z is 0, x1 is 1, x2 is 3. So we don't have s1. Our s2 is negative 1. And then our artificial variable is 1. And then the solution will be 2. And this is now our augmented matrix. So for big M method, our next step is to eliminate all the M's. Okay, so we eliminate all the M's under the artificial variable column. It just so happened that we only have one artificial variable, so which is A1. So ang gagawin natin, we should eliminate M, okay, and make it 0. So para matanggal natin yan, so usually we refer to the row, okay, so we refer to the row whose element is equal to 1. Eh, lagi namang merong 1 doon sa artificial column. So in this case, ito yon. So kumbaga doon sa ano, this would be our pivot element. So ngayon, so how do we eliminate M? So para ma-eliminate ang M natin, so yung ginagamit nating formula, so would be yung R1, okay, so the row 1, so the entire row 1, and then we subtract the coefficient of the first row, okay, so which is M, and then we multiply it with our pivot row, so which is row 3. So by the way, this is our row 1, this is row 2, this is row 3. And that would become our new row 1. That's the one that we are going to use. So R1, so the first row minus the coefficient of that row, multiply it with our pivot row, which is the third row, and then that would become our new row 1. Gagawin ko, I'm just going to copy. So, by the way, don't hesitate to correct me. Medyo nakakalito rin kasi, no, pag minsan. So again, so this is our row 1, this is our row 3. So ang row 1 natin, so ang gagamitin natin yung formula, row 1 minus M row 3. So ang row 1 natin, so we'll start it. By the way, I'm going to delete the first row. So since that's the one that I am changing, kasi I want to eliminate M doon sa artificial column natin. No? So if we use the formula, so ang R1 natin, dito muna sa Z column. So ang R1 natin sa Z column is this one. So ito. So which is 1 minus M. Ang R3 natin is 0. So very large number, multiply it with 0, it's 0. Okay, so 1 minus 0 is 1. So therefore, we have 1 here. So tapos, magpo-proceed tayo dun sa x1. So sa x1 naman, so we'll just do it mentally. No? So negative 1. Okay, so for our R1, ang R3 natin is positive 1. So therefore, that would become negative 1 minus M times 1. That is negative 1 minus M. So negative 1 minus M. So for our x2, so ito naman ang x2 natin. Yung negative 5 and positive 3. So negative 5 minus M times 3. So that would become minus 3M. So negative 5 minus 3M. So for our S1, it's 0 minus M times 0, it's still 0. So 0 minus 0 is 0. So for S2 naman, so we have 0, and then minus M times negative 1, it will become positive M. So for A1 naman, so A1 is M, okay? And then minus M times 1. In short, it's just M minus M, so which is 0. And that's actually our objective. So we want to eliminate M under the artificial variable column. And then for our solution, so we have 0 minus M times 2, it will become negative 2M. Okay? So we're done. Okay? So for that step. So we were now able to eliminate all the M's under the artificial variable column. So once we are done with that, we proceed with the simplex method. So yun lang yung difference niya. So ito lang yung nadagdag na step sa big M method. Sa big M method, so we need to remove first. Okay? So we need to remove first yung mga M's natin, no? Doon sa artificial variable column. And for our next step is we use the simplex method. So which do you think will be our living variable? So remember, so we decide for the living variable. The living variable is the most negative variable under the objective function. Or in this case, dito sa matrix nito, under the first column. So remember that M is a very large number. So which do you think will be our living variable? So you can chat the answer. Your answer. Which do you think will be our living variable? Kasi tatlo lang ang negative natin dito, di ba? The x1, the x2, and the solution. Pero again, okay, so thank you. So x2. Okay, so very good. So x2 will be our living variable. So x2 will be our living variable. So kasi nga, yung m, parang sabihin mo, that's million. Yeah. So minus 1 million. So that would be negative 1 million 1. So isa is negative 5 minus 3 million. That is negative 3 million and 5. The other one is negative 2 million. So the most negative one is x2. So ngayon, ito yung magiging pivot column natin. So this one would become our pivot column. Our next here is to determine which will become our pivot row. So our pivot row should have an intercept which the smallest positive intercept between the constraints. So will become our pivot row or will become our living variable. So in this case, so ang pinaka-intercept natin, so pag sinabi natin intercept, so we just divide yung sa solution, divide it with that of the element doon sa pivot column natin. In this case, that is 6 divided with 4. So 6 divided with 4, that is 3 all over 2. And then for the second constraint, so we have 2 divided with 3. So 2/3. So both of them are positive. So pwede silang pagpilian. Pero ang pipiliin natin would be the smaller or the smallest positive. So 2/3 is smaller as compared to 3 over 2. So therefore, our pivot column then will be the third row. Okay, so third row would be our pivot column. And then the intersection will serve as our pivot element. Kaya lang, sa pivot element natin, so what we want, okay, so what we want for our pivot element should be 1. Okay? So yun, para maging 1 yan, so we need to multiply the entire row by 1/3. So ang gagawin natin, so we multiply the entire row 3 by 3. Kasi pag mayroon na tayo, 3 divides 3, so that will become 1. So I'm going to copy again, so the entire, tapos, so in here, so yung entering variable is x2, the leaving variable is s2, so therefore, this s2 will change. So it will now become the entering variable, which is x2. And then afterwards, so since kailangan natin gawin 1 yung sa pivot element natin, so we delete the entire column and then we divide the entire row. So we divide the entire row by 3. So that is 0 divides, so we'll start with this one. So 0 divides 3 is 0. So 1 divides 3 is 1/3. So 3 divides 3 is 1. 0 over 3 is 0. Negative 1 over 3 is negative 1/3. Then 1 over 3, and we have 2/3. So again, remember that this is our pivot element. So we want our pivot element to be 1. And then once we are done, so we need to make the eigenvalues, no? In the eigenvalue form. So ang gagawin natin, so all the rows above the pivot element should be 0. So in this case, so we need to make this 4 0 at saka itong negative 5 minus 3m to be 0 as well. So gagamitin lang natin yung formula kanina, no? So ano ba yung pinapalitan nating row? So dito ang pinapalitan natin is row 1. Dito sa pangalawa, it's row 2. So those are the rows that we are changing. Then magsusubtract lang tayo. So both, magsusubtract tayo. Ang ilalagay natin dito yung coefficient. Okay? So this one, yung sa x2 column, which is the negative 5 minus 3m at saka yung 4. And then we multiply it with our pivot row, so which is the third row, R3, R3. And this would become our new R1, and this one would become our new R2. Now, this one is the same as R1 plus 5 plus 3m times R3. And that would become our new R1. Ang gagawin natin yan, so we copy again. But this time, so since we are changing the row 1 and row 2, so we will be deleting row 1 and row 2. So following our formula. So ano ba ang formula natin? So for our row 1. So for our row 1, sabi niya R1. So ang R1 natin, so R1 is 1. Ito yun, 1. Yung plus 5 plus 3M. Ang R3 natin is 0. So since 0 na siya, so this one would just become 1. Susunod is yung negative 1 minus M. Then plus M plus 3M. So times ang R3 natin is, ito ang R3 which is 1/3. So kung titingnan natin yan, so we'll have negative 1. Sorry, that should be 5. So we have negative 1 plus 5 over 3. So we have negative 1 minus we have 2/3. And then afterwards, yung sa x2 naman. So x2 is negative, sorry, 2/3 for the constant. And then for the variable, okay, so tama. It will become negative m plus, yun, 3m over 3, it's m. So negative m plus m is just m. So minus m plus m will be 0. So our x1 will just be 2/3. And then for our x2, so we have negative 5 minus 3m. So plus 5 plus 3m. And then we multiply it with 1. So in short, that will just be 0. And then yung sa S1 column naman natin, so this is 0. Ang R3 is 0 as well. So therefore, automatic that will be 0 as well. And then the next one, so yung S2. So we have M. So minus 5 plus 3M. Multiply it with negative 1/3. That will become M. So plus 5 over 3. And then negative, negative, positive. Sorry, it should be plus. No? So M plus 5 plus 3M. So it will become minus M. So we just have positive or negative, sorry. Negative, kasi negative 1/3 pala yun. So negative M minus 5 over 3. So minus M. So it will become negative 5 over 3. Then dun sa A1 naman natin, so we have 0. And then 0, so plus 5 plus 3M. So divide it with 1/3. So it will become 5 over 3 plus M. And then lastly, so we have negative 2M plus 5 plus 3M. And then we have 2/3. So we have negative 2M plus 10 over 3 plus 2M. So negative 2M plus 2M is 0. So we'll have 10 over 3. So that is our first column. For our second column, so we have R2 minus 4R3. So ito mas madali. So medyo mahirap dun sa first column, it involves M. So this time, so it will just be R2, 0, minus 4 times 0, it's 0. And next we have 3, negative 4 times positive 1/3 is 3 minus 4 over 3. So it will become 3 or 1 and 2/3. So that would become 1 and 2/3 is the same as 5 over 3. Tapos dito naman, so 4 minus 4 times 1, that is 0. And then we have 1 minus 4 times 0, it's 1. And next we have 0 minus 4 times negative 1/3, so that would become positive 4 over 3. And for A1, so we have 0 minus 4 times 1/3, it's negative 4 over 3. And then we have 6 minus 4 times 2 is 8 over 3. So 6 minus 8 over 3, so 18 minus 10, 8 over 3, or 18 minus 8. So that would be 10 over 3 as well. So ayan. So we were now able to eliminate yung solution na dun sa ano no, yung sa x2. Next is, are we going to continue? So kung titingnan natin, do we still have a negative coefficient or negative element on our objective function? We still have 1. So which is the negative 5 over 3. So therefore, our entering variable this time so would be S2. So which is the negative 5 over 3, no? Negative 5 over 3, 4 over 3, and negative 1/3. So next is we compute for the intercept. So to decide what would be our pivot row. So for our intercept, so we have 10 over 3 divided with 4 over 3. So which is equals to 10 over 4, which is 5 over 2. So the other one is 2/3 over negative 1/3. So which is negative 2. Although 2 is smaller than 5 over 2, pero what we need here is the smallest positive. Okay, so negative 2 is negative. So therefore, our pivot row so will be this one. So our living variable this time now will become the S2. Kaya lang, ang gusto natin ngayon will be, so we want the 4, kasi ito na ngayon yung pivot element natin, no? So which is 4 over 3. So we want to eliminate that, or we want to make that equal to 1. Okay, so the pivot element should always be equal to 1. So to do that, ang gagawin natin, we multiply it by 3/4. So we multiply the second row by 3/4 so as to force our pivot element to become 1. So we copy the matrix. So S1 so will now become S2. And then, so I want to make my pivot element equal to 1. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to multiply the entire row by 3 over 4. So we multiply the entire row with this one. So 3 over 4. So 3 over 4 times 0 is 0. So 5 over 3 times 3 over 4 is 5 over 4. So 0 times 3 over 4 is 0. So 1 and times 3/4 is 3/4. So 4/3 times 3/4 is 1. Negative 4 over 3 times 3/4 is negative 1. And then 10 over 3 times 3/4 would be 10 over 4 or 5 over 2. Correct. So 0, 5 over 4, 0, 3 over 4, 1, negative 1, 5 over 2. So for our pivot element, okay, so which becomes 1. So our next agenda is to make the first row and the third row so to be equal to 0. So yan gagawin natin kamukha nung kanina. So this would become the first row. This is the third row. So we subtract. The coefficient is negative 5 over 3. So it would become positive 5 over 3 for the second row or our pivot row. And then this is R3 minus negative 1/3. So it would become positive 1/3 R2. This one would becomes our new R1, and this one would become our new R3. And then we perform. So I copy again. Okay. So we now have for the first two rows, so R1, R2. So we have 1 and 0. So 1 plus 5 times 5 over 3 times 0 is 0. So 1 plus 0 is 1. Then 2/3 plus 5 over 3 times 5 over 4. So 25 over 8 plus 2/3. So calculator na lang. 25 25 over 12. Okay, so 25 over 12 plus 2/3. So the answer will be nata akong calculator. Mano-mano natin. R1 is 2/3 plus 5 times 5, so 25. So 3 times 4 is 12. We have 12, 3, 4, 8 plus 25. So 25 is 33 over 12. So 33 over 12 is by 3, it's 11 over 4. So we have 11 over 4. Because we have 0 plus 0 is 0. So 0 plus 5 over 3 times 3/4, that is 5 over 4. Plus negative 5 over 3 plus 5 over 3 times 1, that will become 0. And then the next one, so 5 over 3 plus m, so plus 5 over 3 times negative 1, or just minus 5 over 3. So it will just become m. And for our solution, so 10 over 3 plus 5 over 3 times R2, which is 5 over 2. So 10 over 3 plus 25 over 6. So, 220, 45 over 6. So 45 over 6, so by 3, that is 15 all over 2. And then for the last row, so we have R3, so 0, R2 is 0, so this is 0. So 1/3 plus 1/3 times 5 over 4. So 1/3 plus 1/3 times 5 over 4. So 1/3 plus 5 over 12. So 12, 4, 9 over 12. That is by 3, so 3/4. And then we have 1 plus 0, it's 1. So 0 plus 1/3 times 3/4 is 1/4. So it's negative 1/3 plus 1/3 times 1, that is 0. So we have 1/3 minus 1/3 is 0. So 2/3. So 2/3 plus 1/3 times 5 over 2. So 2 over 3, 5 over 6. So that is 6, 2, 4, 9 over 6. So we'll have 3 all over 2. Okay. So this time, as you can see, we don't have a negative element anymore. Okay, so under our objective function, so that means we're done. Okay? So we just need to interpret. So sabi natin kanina, kung babalikan natin yung sabi dito, so we need to determine our basic variable and the non-basic variable. So when we say basic variable, if it corresponds to a column in the tableau that has exactly one non-zero element. So titingin ka daw dito na iisa lang yung non-zero element. So ano yung mga yon? So you can see here, so of course, z is a basic variable kasi isa lang ang non-zero, which is this one, 1, 0, 0. So x1, puro sila non-zero. x2, puro sila, x2 isa lang ang non-zero. So 0, 0, 1. S1, hindi. S2, basic variable din ng S2. A1, hindi. Okay? Actually, yung non-zero, it's not necessarily 1. Okay? So it's not necessarily 1. Pero it should only be 1 non-zero. So tatlo lang yung uh, there are only 3 columns, okay? So which contains one non-zero. And then based from here, so once you were able to identify our basic variables, so in short, if I'm going to write, so my basic variables, so these are my basic variables. Basic variables are Z, X2, and S2. While our non-basic variables are X1, X1, S1, A1. And usually, yung mga non-basic variables natin, automatic, okay? So, X1 here is 0, S1 is 0, A1 is 0. So, all non-basic variables are all zeros. So, yung mga basic variables natin, so yun lang ang merong values. Kaya lang, so for us to determine that problem has a solution, it has a solution if the non-zeros do not coincide on the same row. So ano ba yung mga yon? So for example, this one. So yung sa Z, ito yung non-zero niya. So meron ba siyang non-zero na kapantay? Wala. Okay? Kasi yung non-zero for the column Z is on the first row. For S2 naman, so ang S2, ito yung non-zero niya. Nasa second row naman siya. And then yung X2 naman is nandun sa third row. So X2, this is S2, and this is Z. So if the basic variables, okay, or the non-zero do not coincide, okay, so with any of the row of the other non-zeros, then the solution has a problem. But if the non-zeros, okay, if the non-zeros of the basic variables coincide with another non-zero of another basic variable, then that makes the problem to have no solution. Okay, so there's no solution pag nag-coincide sila on the same row. Okay, pero in this case, hindi sila nag-coincide. As you can see here, so what we can see now, so what will be our values? So our value for Z is actually equal to, so ito, Z is 5 or 15 over 2. And then ano ang value ng S2 natin? Ang S2 natin is for the second row, so which is 5 all over 2. And then for our X2 naman, so which is on the third column. X2 is on the third column, so that is 3 all over 2. So ito bang solution natin? Okay? So therefore, ang X1 natin dito is equals to 0. And then ang X2 natin is equals to 3 over 2. So to have a maximum value of Z, which is 15 all over 2. So X1 is equals to 0. X2 is equals to 3 over 2. So to have a maximum value of 15 all over 2. So we can check. Ano ba yung Z natin? Yung Z natin is X1 plus 5X2. X1 plus 5X2. So ang X1 natin is 0 plus 5. Ang x2 natin is 3 all over 2. So z here is equals to 15 over 2. So which is okay. So that means our solution is okay. So the maximum value of 15 over 2 will be achieved when x of 1 is 0 and x of 2 is 3 all over 2. And that's how we do the big M method. Question.
Sir, question lang. What happens next po pagka yung mga non-zero value ay nag-coincide?
Sorry. What happens
Pag yung mga
if
value ng mga non-zero ay nag-coincide with each other, ano yung next step na gagawin natin?
no, kapag nag-coincide sila on the same row, so our conclusion then would be there's no solution. So for the given problem. So we just concluded there's no solution for the given problem since nagko-coincide sila. So usually nangyayari yon if there are too much constraints. So ibig sabihin nun, uh, we cannot achieve, okay, so the maximum output because we cannot satisfy all of the constraints. So ang possibility nun, nagko-contradict yung mga constraints. You cannot satisfy both constraints. So that is why nagkakaroon tayo ng no solution.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
Okay? So may mga problems na ganun. Kasi kung i-graph mo siya, makikita mo sa graph na usually there's no feasible region. Okay? So hindi bounded. Hindi bounded yung problem natin. Yung constraints natin masyadong marami. Okay? So those are the usual causes whenever we are arriving to a no solution for our conclusion. Okay.
Sir, question.
There are other
Question, sir.
question?
Sir, yung sa procedure na eliminate M, sa simula lang yun, sir. Kasi bumalik yata yung M sa artificial variable.
Saglit lang. I'll fix my speaker, no? Hindi ko marinig. Nag-look. Ayun. Ayan. Wait, I can hear it. Ay, wala pa rin.
Hello, sir.
Sira kasi yung speaker ng laptop. Ang problema ko, hindi ko makonect ng AirPod. Hello. Hello. Can you stop it? Yung ito na lang yung mute ko. Hello. Ay, gusto na ako mute. Okay, hello. Can you hear me using this?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Again, can you speak?
Low, sir.
Ayan.
Hello, sir.
Ayan, sorry. Ano yung question uli nung last?
Yes, sir. Di ba may step tayo na eliminate M sa artificial variable?
Yes.
Okay lang, sir, na magbabalik yung M sa last na solution, sir.
Yeah, it's fine. Pag ano na siya, dun sa simplex method. Pero bago ka pa mag-simplex method, we should eliminate M first. Pero pagdating dun sa simplex method, it's fine na babalik at babalik ng M dun sa artificial column.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sir, I have a question din po.
I guess.
Dun sir sa pag-add nung M, dun sa artificial column, dun sa initial, di ba po sir negative MA yung i-add?
Sorry.
Or nag-transpose po siya kaya naging positive M?
Ano, doon sa,
Yun po kasi dun sa steps, nakalagay po for each artificial variable, add negative MA.
add negative. Yeah, kasi nag-transpose siya, kaya nag-positive siya.
Okay. And another question din po sir. dun sa last part o dun sa interpretation, dun
Mhm.
sa if yung non-zero value is not 1, kunwari po 2 siya. So yung kunwari po value nung z, tapos 2 yung non-zero, bali 2 times yung solution para makuha yung value ng z.
No, we divide.
Ah, so solution divided by yung
Kasi parang ano
non-zero.
siya nun eh. Solution divide the coefficient. The non-zero coefficient. Or non-one. Kasi
Ah,
parang ano yun eh. Diba? Kasi coefficient ng mga to yun. So kung meron kang parang ganyan, 1s2 is equals to 5 over 2. Pero kung meron kang 2, para siyang 2s2 all over 5
divide.
over 2. So we divide 2. So para makuha natin yung s2.
Tapos sir, dapat positive mo yung pong coefficient.
Yung coefficient should be uh, positive. Yeah.
Okay po sir, thank you po.
Ayun. So by the way, if you have questions along the way, you can always interrupt me. Or baka ini-interrupt nyo kung di ko naririnig. No? Anyway, are we good with this one? Yeah, you really need to practice. By the way, do you have your uh, computers or laptop with you right now?
Yes po.
Yeah. Yes sir.
Yes, sir.
O sige, bago ako pumunta dun sa minimization, so I think para hindi naman nakakaumay. So we try it on our end as well. No, I'll introduce to you some, actually, Excel, at least the Excel part. Wala akong doon. Uh, Sige, start muna tayo sa Excel. No? Can you open an Excel? I'll share an Excel file. Were you able to open one?
Yes po.
Okay. Ang Excel kasi meron siyang built-in solver. Okay, so for QM, kung pupunta ka doon sa data, meron ka makikita ditong solver. I'll just share my entire screen. So if you're going to can you see a solver under your data?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Yung mga hindi nakakita, so pwede siyang install. Punta ka dito sa Tools, and then dito sa Excel add-ins, and then click mo yung the solver add-ins. Then you click OK. So lalabas yung solver nun. And pag pumunta ka sa data section, you click the solver. So you'll be able to have the solver parameter here. So ito yung pinaka-simple. By the way, this one is good only for simplex method. So I'll try to tignan ko yung sinolve nating example dun sa simplex method. Dun sa yun. May kukopyahin ako. Pwedeng kopyahin nyo to. So, gagawin ko yung tables and shares. Yung tables as T. Yung shares as C. Kasi meron tayong yung problem natin before, ang sabi natin, so we maximize, yung first problem natin for simplex method, so maximize profit, and then Z is equal to 70T plus 50C. Yan yung mga constraints natin. So we have the first constraint, so 4T plus 1C is less than or equal to 240. Tapos yung second is 2T plus 1C is less than or equal to 100. Of course, yung T is greater than or equal to 0 and C is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so this is our first example nun. Let's see. So, ang gagawin natin yan, so we declared our two variables here, the tables and shares. So, tables is T, and then shares is C. And then this is our objective function. So, for our objective function then, so we just take equal, and then we follow this formula for our objective function, which is 70T. So, 70, so multiply it with T, so which is the tables. So dito tayo niyan. B2. Okay? So that is where the number of tables will come out. And then meron tayong plus 50, multiply it with the number of chairs. So that would be C. And then we take the equal sign. So that is where we enter our objective. And our objective is to maximize the profit. And then for our constraints, so meron tayong carpentry constraints. And the other one, we have the painting constraints. And then yung mga non-negative constraints natin. So for our carpentry constraints dun sa left-hand side, so we take yung 40 times the number of tables, and then plus, sorry, it should be 3C. 40 plus 3C. 40 plus 3C less than 240, 2C plus 1C less than 100. Lalagay natin dito niyan, so would be 4, multiply it with T, and then plus 3, multiply it with C. And then ang right-hand side niya is 240. So it's equals to 240. Pangalawa, so for the painting constraints, so we have 2T, so 2 times T, then plus 1C. It's just the B3. And then it's less than 2 or equal to 100. And for our negative constraint, so that is just equal to T and greater than or equal to 0. And this would be equal to C greater than or equal to 0. So let me know when you are done. Nakaka-follow?
Sir, anong formula ang ginamit na sa non-negative 1 and non-negative 2?
Yung ano lang, it's just the T and the C. So non-negative 1 is the T is greater than or equal to 0. So T is the B2. And then the so for the number of chairs. So we have the answer for that. I think the answer is for 30 tables, 40 chairs, and then the profit is 4,100. Okay. Are we done?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Simple lang, no? If we click the solver, so under our objectives, so for our objective, so we just click the cell, okay? So where we encoded our objective function. Click, sorry. It's B6. And then for the changing variable cells, so the cells would be, so we have to highlight, okay, so the two cells, so which corresponds to our variables. In this case, that is B2 and B3. That is for tables and chairs. And then, of course, so this one is the maximization problem. So we click the max. If it is a minimization, we click min. But again, this is only for simplex method. So merong nonlinear. And then for our constraint, so we just simply add. So we click add. So once we click the add constraint, so our cell reference would be at the left-hand side. So we click the carpentry constraint, and it's less than or equal to, and then yung sa constraint part would be the right-hand side. So we click the 240. So left-hand side is on the cell reference. Then the inequality is the less than or equal to, and the right-hand side would be the constraint. So once done, we click OK. So lalabas yung first constraints natin. And for the second constraint, so ganun ulit. For the painting constraint, so less than or equal to, and then for the constraint, so we have the 100. We click OK. The third, so yung non-negative constraints natin, so it's greater than or equal to, and then 0. And lastly, so yung non-negative 2 is greater than or equal to, and then 0. So we click OK. So once you are done, tama ba? So 9 and 10 is less than or equal to, and greater than yung 11 and 12. Okay? So we click simplex method. So once we click the simplex method, so we click solve. What happened? Ayun. So lalabas yung solution. So the solution would be, there would be 30 tables, 40 chairs, and then the optimized profit is 4,100. So this is the same solution that we had para naman doon sa simplex method that we've done before. Okay, so were you able to get it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Ako naman.
Okay, good. So ganun lang, kasimple. Okay? So sa Excel, no? So sa atin kasi, siyempre, hindi natin isosolve yan man ng mano-mano, no? So we use software. Pero we just need to understand how it works. Tapos, Sige. Yung kanina naman, we'll try to solve it using ano, no? Yung mano-mano sa Excel. So kasi yung big M method dito, hindi siya nag-work. Pero let's try to solve it using yung kanina. No? Balikan ko yung sa ano, big M method. So punta na ako doon sa ano, no? So yung sa matrix natin, di ba we have the basic, tapos Z, X1, X2, S1, S2, A1, and the solution. Then we have Z, S1, S2. Another solution would be using Excel. Kamukha rin nung kanina, pero we're not going to do it manually. We're going to use Excel. Pero we'll show data blue. Unlike with the solver kasi solution lang yung ilalabas niya. So you write down the constraints and the objective function, it will show you the final answer. So if we want to show data blue, so we can do it manually. Like for our first tableau, so we have 1, a -1, a -5, 0, and 0. So since M is very large number, I'm just going to assume, let's say my M, instead of writing M, kasi pag M yan, hindi naman siya ititreat ng, ng Excel. So mahirap siyang mag-apply ng formula. So using a variable M. So instead of using M, but we know that M is a very large number, I'm assuming that M would be 1 million. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 1 million. So that's my M. And then, so I'll have 0, 3, 4, 1, 0, 0. Solution is 6. Ito yung first tableau natin kanina. No? So 0, 1, 3, 0, -1, 1, 2. So 0, 1, 3, 0, -1, 1, 2. So ito, i-repeat natin yung ginawa natin kanina. No? Pero this time, so hindi na tayo magmano-mano. So gagamit lang tayo ng Excel. No? So di ba yung first step natin dito, so we eliminate yung 1,000. Sabi natin dyan, yung first row, so we minus yung coefficient, so which is 1 million. 1, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. 1 million. And then, ang pivot column natin, which is 1, which is row 3. So multiply it with row 3. So ito yung formula na gagamitin natin. Okay? So para ma-eliminate natin yung 1 million on the first column. So what I'm going to do, so I'm just going to copy this one. And then I'm going to paste it. Pero tatanggalin ko yung first column kasi I want to make this 1 million to be equal to 0. So by following this formula. Kaya lang, sa formula natin, so sabi niya, it should be R1. So, ang R1 natin is yan. And then minus the coefficient of A1. In this case, the 1 million. Kaya lang, ang 1 million na to, since this is constant, this is fixed. So, hindi siya nag-move. So, therefore, para maging constant yung 1 million na yan, hindi ko alam sa Windows ano yung ano. Sa akin kasi is FN $sign F4 or hindi ko lang kung F4 lang sa Windows. So para ang ibig sabihin kasi ng $sign na yan, that is fixed. No? Hindi siya magmo-move. So kaya nagda-$sign tayo kasi fixed itong 1 million na to. Hindi ka mukha nung row, ayan nagmo-move yan. And then magmo-multiply tayo ng row 3. So which is this is the row 3. And then we click enter. So kaya ang sagot nun is 1. So pag nagawa mo na doon, ang kaganda sa Excel, isa-copy ko lang siya throughout. I'm just going to click this one and then drag it until the solution. So yun na yung lalabas nun. So as you can see here, na-eliminate na yung 1 million doon sa A1 column. So kagaya nung kanina niyan, so what I'll be doing is, so yung kanina, this one is our entering variable, di ba? It's negative 3 million. So kukuhanin natin yung intercept. So this one is our intercept. So for our intercept then, so would be it's just 6. We divide it with 4. And we bring it down. So 1 is 0.67. So therefore, this one would become our, and this is our pivot row. Tapos, we want maging 1 yung pivot element natin. Kaya we divide the entire row by 3. So, I'm going to copy and paste it. Ay, nag-iba siya no, pag pinaste ko. So, kung gusto kong i-copy to, so click C. Kasi formula pala yung pinag-input ko. So, I'm going to paste values. Ayun. So, para kamukha niya. Kasi kung hindi values ang ipipaste, mag-iiba yung table. So, balik ko lang sila doon sa dati. Yan. So, since ang pinapalitan natin will be this last column, the third row, sorry. So, we divide the third row by 3. So, that would be equal to the third row divided by 3. And then we just move, we copy. So, yun yung magiging sagot. 0, 1/3, 1, 0, negative 1/3, positive 1/3, 2/3. Okay. Tama. And then, so since you were able to make the pivot element equal to 1, so ito yung gagawin natin. Yun nga, no? Yung R1. So we subtract. So in this case, we plus. No? 3 million 5. Then times ang pivot row natin is R3. So ito naman, it's R2 minus 4 times R3. So we copy again. We paste values. Then we remove the first two rows. Then sabi natin, it's R1, then plus or minus yung pivot or dun sa this one. Okay? And then we fix it with F4. Then we multiply R3. And then ganun din ito. So equal R2 naman siya. So we minus 4. Kaya lang we fix it. Multiply R3. Ayan. Ang objective natin, dapat yung sa X2 maging 0 lahat yon. So which is nangyari naman. So kaya lang, meron pa tayong ulit. So under S2 naman, so we have a negative coefficient there. So kukuhanin natin ngayon yung intercept. So for the intercept, so the solution, divide it with S2. So ganun din ito. So therefore, this one becomes our pivot row. And the negative 1/3, so will become our pivot element. Pero gusto natin, so that is 4/3, no? So we multiply it by 3 times R2 divided with 4. So I'll copy this one. I'll paste the values. My next objective is, yun nga, so gawing 1 yung sa S2. So to do that, so that would be equal to 3 times R2, then divide it with 4. Okay, so doing that, so we'll change our pivot element to be 0. So ngayon, ang kailangan natin dito, so will be R1, and then we add, so minus 1.67, that's 5/2. So 5 times R2 over 2. And then yung sa baba naman, it's R3, it's minus, no? So it would become plus 1/3. So R2 over 3. I'll cover this one. And lastly, so we want this one, the first, or change the first row and the last row. So for the first row, so we have row 1, and then minus, so the 1.67, then fix it, and multiply it with R2. And then dapat maging 0 yun. Okay. And lastly, so we have R3 and minus this one. So we fix it, multiply it with R2. Ano nangyari? R2 should be R320. Yun. Okay, as you can see here, so dito natin makikita that Z is 7.5, and then yung S2 natin S2 is 2.5, and then yung X2 sorry, hindi ko pinalitan yung mga ano. Makikita mo naman. So yung first row is Z, and then ang second is S2. So this one would become S2. And then ito is the X2. Makikita mo naman anong row siya. So mauna yung first row, ito. Pangalawa is S2. Pangatlo is X2. So doon mo makikita yung mga basic variables natin. And then all other non-basic variables will be 0. Z is 7.5. S2 is 2.5. X2 is 1.5. Then anything else will be 0. Okay, so that's how we do using Excel. Ito yung mga solution natin. Pero ang pinaka-solution natin, of course, will be this one. Question. Okay, hello?
None, sir.
Mabilis ba? So medyo pag nag-practice naman kayo, so you'll be able to understand it. Kasi kung medyo titingnan lang natin, medyo mahirap i-grasp. No? There's another one. Meron ako dito Excel QM. Ito, it's another add-ins. So kung pupunta ka sa pwede ka mag-search sa Google. So search mo lang search ko dito. QM for Excel. Ito ata. Diba? Ay, alis na. Ay, di, ay, ito. Yun. So ito. Tignan nyo dito. Cedar Crest. Tapos pag click mo yun, so you can download the QM. So for Excel. Sa akin kasi for Mac. No? Pag na-download mo na siya, install mo lang. And then lalabas siya dito ng Excel QM. I decided to do it using this one. Ito kasi hindi siya, baka pwede siya, hindi ko lang siya alam galawin. Ito, for example, it's a, marami na kasi ito yun. Ginagamit sa ano. Pero since gagamitin natin is for linear programming, so we can click this one. Tapos mag-specify siya. So let's say this one is we maximize Z. And then ilan ang constraints natin? Ang constraints dito yung ano lang, no? Hindi na natin sinasama yung non-negative constraints. So dadalawa, variable, so this one is dalawa rin, no? And then we maximize. So we click OK. So tapos may lalabas na. So parang kamukha na lang yung kanina. No? Pero ito, hindi ko nagagalawin yung sa Excel solver. So gagawin mo lang dito, so we maximize. So for example, yung sinolve natin kanina, that's just 1 for x1, and then 5 for x2. And then, so for the constraints, so we have 3 for x1, and then 4 for x2. It's less than or equal to. Pag less than lang. So may legend naman dito. And then it equals to 6. Tapos for constraint number 2, so we have 1. And then we have 3. So ito, greater than siya. So palitan natin siya ng greater than. And then it will be equal to 2. So once you are done, so you just run the solver. Click run. So lalabas na yung sagot. Ayun na. X1 is 0, X2 is 1.5, and then the maximum Z is 7.5. So this is using Excel QM. Or try mo rin dun sa kanina. Pwede rin. Okay. Kaya pa ba? So we have a break or we'll continue with the minimization problem. So by the way, on your, we have assignment. So for maximization problem, using big M method, if you go to your module, So we have, okay, we'll be solving this one. Big M method for maximization problem. Nakamukha lang nung medyo mahaba lang na. So this will be the scenario. And then, so using big M method, so you state the problem, so you formulate the LP, so you create the tableau for the augmented matrix using Excel. Ito yung ginawa ko kanina, no? Yung using this one. So using Excel, try to solve it, then show the tableau. And then the next one is make an alternative solution by solving it using Excel QM. So try to download the Excel QM. Ito naman yung solution mo para doon sa isa. So mas madali ito, no? Pang verify kung tama yung solution mo doon sa this one versus this. And then lastly, so you make an analysis and conclusion. So of course, we have the rubric on how to grade your output. So by the way, if hopefully tama naman yung sagot, no? Pero kung hindi tama yung sagot, so once I check it, I'll give a feedback, I'll return it to you, and then you have to redo it again, no? If mali yung sagot. Pero kung tama na, that's okay. So dapat ang objective natin dito, our grade should all be under the evident. So kung andun tayo dun sa approaching or not evident, so we have to redo our work. Okay? So I guess we need a break. No? Kain muna tayo. Medyo nagutom na ako. And then we go back in the afternoon.
Sige po.
For the minimization problem naman. It's 11:14. Are we okay with 12 o'clock? Or 1 o'clock? Siguro mga ano na lang tayo. 1 hour more. Para doon sa minimization problem. What do you think? What do you prefer? So we go back early at 12, then finish at around 1 o'clock or 1:30 at most? Or shall we go back at 1?
12, sir.
12 na lang. So para mahaba pa yung Saturday nyo. No. Sige.
Yes, sir.
Sige, 12 o'clock. So we'll have 45 minutes break.
Yes, sir.
So have a happy lunch. Okay. I'll stop the link. I'll just reactivate it para makat yung recording niya. Or stop ko na lang.